Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Mark from Solar Games, and today we're going to spend a little time to discuss Sorcery TCG. So, about 4 or 5 months ago, I made a video on Sorcery TCG, kind of like a review of the gameplay and all this stuff, based on some videos I watch and learn to play and things like that. Right? Obviously, I did say in the video in the beginning that I was cautious in that I have not played the game because the game wasn't available back then. I have not played the game, so I'm just basing this stuff based on what I'm seeing other people play and how they're playing it, right? The difficulty, the issues I saw. The main things I pointed out were like, I think the grid system is kind of interesting. I think the fact that like the champions can kind of run around makes it feel like chess, and that's cool. I like the artwork. Obviously, it looks very rustic and like old school. It reminds me of the good old days of Magic, right? And I love the fact that like if nothing else, people are out there still innovating and creating new games. These are all positive things, right? But some of the downsides, I thought the game looks really complicated. Honestly, there were a lot of different interactions that I felt were tricky, right? For example, the fact that the map, which is your land, is also kind of like the tracking the board for everything, where you're going to lay out your creatures, to attack your opponents, is tricky. Number two is, there's always this kind of like while this is a cool system to have the grid system be part of the game, it does cause kind of like regrets, meaning once you lay down land, you can't easily just redo the land. So if you didn't build your atlas correctly, then you could cause yourself problems later on in the game. So these are kind of like the points I pointed out. So I did actually, have a chance a little bit before Thanksgiving to go play the game, and I did play around with my buddy, who basically, we did this stuff with the beta decks or the beta print run. Um, and so I finally now can give a full review on Sorcery TCG. So we're going to be doing that today. All right. So first thing, I played around in Sorcery TCG. I did play as the air element, right? So the one that's like all about like lightning bolts and those kind of things and flying around, that kind of stuff. And then my buddy did play the water element. So his concept was that he had to go submerge. He basically couldn't touch anywhere unless it had water or had been submerged or flooded. And so he had to basically build either water tiles or flood other tiles. But it definitely felt like at points his creatures were stronger. Not only were they stronger, they usually were tougher to deal with. And the weakness, of course, is the fact that they can't get on land unless they flood. So he had to go plan some of those kind of things. My strength, of course, is the fact that like I'm a spellcaster, so I have a lot of creatures that can kind of go out there and spellcast in different areas, and I don't have to cast just from my avatar. So that was kind of cool. The other part of it too is all my creatures I realized had high mobility. If I had them on certain lands, or if I could use some of my lands in a special way, I was able to migrate and move these creatures like across the board, many steps. Whereas normally your movement is like one or two, squares. So that was a really cool too, to have like flying and get a feel for how flying works in this game. So right off the bat, I felt like the game was pretty fun. There are a lot of elements where I really liked. I like the fact that there was a separation between land and your kind of like action, or in Magic we call gas. So there was never a moment of feeling mana screwed, and you didn't have to draw a card and realize, oh, it's another mana, or oh, I don't have enough mana to play my creatures. So that was fine. Talking about the mana system too. Originally in my video, I had a little concern about tracking, because the way that mana works in this game is that you have a base mana, and then you have kind of like a threshold or a requirement mana. For example, if I have to play like deserts, right? This like kind of like red mana, yeah, then I have to meet a certain threshold before I can play my creature, right? Whereas, but in addition to that, if I want to play a creature that has 3 costs, for example, I have to kind of like expend 3 mana. But that mana is actually limited, meaning if I have only 6 mana, if I spend 3, I only have 3 left. Whereas once you meet the threshold, you can play as many cards as you want that have that threshold cost. See, like as I'm explaining this too, it actually sounds kind of complicated, but in reality, playing the game, that part is pretty easy. I felt like tracking this was a little bit difficult, but I had an app open. I just dropped another little token on there to track the amount of mana I have left in that turn, and that worked out pretty well too. So that's fine. The things that like were kind of easier for first time playing also was the fact that most of the time there was no decision to be made when it's not your turn, right? So there's no spells, if you will, that have instant speed or fast speed. Basically, you couldn't really do anything that was not on your turn. So if it's my opponent's turn, I basically can sit back, watch how he's playing, think about my next turn, etc. Right? There was not much interaction I can make. So if you're thinking about it from a new player perspective, that's actually a positive thing because it's less to think about. But from a veteran perspective, from a player that likes depth, I think having more interaction is definitely more interesting as a card game than this. Um, Speaking of attacking and interacting with creatures, I felt like attacking was really complicated in this game. Maybe even overly complicated, right? There were ways that you can attack into a tile, have creatures join in attack, or have creatures block for another creature, but then take the other creature out of combat to save it, etc. So while it's very realistic in how combat works, this part was way more complicated than necessary. I almost felt like if they could make the combat simpler and then make the spell interactions more interesting, that would actually, I think, be a better game overall. But that's just my opinion, right? So that's how I feel. Lastly, one of the things that was really challenging about this game, and I originally said this in my original review as well, but in playing this game and understanding the three-dimensional, 3D, three-dimensionality of this game made it actually way more difficult to even understand what's happening. As an example, right, when I was attacking my opponent, I realized that his creatures were underwater, which meant that I couldn't actually attack them because they weren't, of course, on the same plane as me. In addition, when I was casting things like Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning, I couldn't actually chain his creature because there were three layers to essentially the map. There was the underground layer, there's the above ground layer, and there's the ground layer. And so if you were to chain from, let's say, one tile to the tile north, you actually couldn't do that if there's no creature on the tile. What you have to do is chain to a creature underneath the tile and then cross to the underneath plane of the next tile, meaning you kind of think of it as a three-dimensional plane where if you adjacency is meant as like a three-dimensional, so up down, left, right, and then like forward, backwards is your three-dimensional adjacency. It's really tricky. Honestly, it causes a lot of problems, and how you represent the creatures. You literally have to tuck the card underneath another card to show that it's underground or in, a flooded zone, etc. So that part, I'm not really a big fan of it, and it's kind of, a little bit annoying to actually have to deal with that. In fact, there was a kill move towards the end of the game that I could not execute because the way that the chain lightning would work would I could not chain it from above ground to the next tile in front of me with a creature underneath the water. I had to chain it to a creature underneath the water and then to the tile over. It's really tricky, right? Even though, especially, I think how chain lightning works, I can just shock the river and the whole river should electrocute or something. But anyways, that would be a little too overpowered. The other part of it too is also like because of the coordinate system and how it works with flying creatures that they can go diagonal. So essentially, you're saving two moves in one. There are times when it's really hard to predict all the different moves a creature can make, right? So obviously, my creatures can kind of like fly almost across the map, and if I start on a land that gave me even one extra movement, meant that my creature can now go even further than before, and that caused some problems because I think my finishing move, with my opponent, where I put him at death's door and I was trying to chase him down, I realized it was not easy to kind of like for him to go figure out exactly how I would plan my move to go execute the kill. And that to me felt really bad because I want a card game where it's not so complicated that you couldn't understand the board state. You should be able to at any moment understand the board state. While there are some unpredictable things, you shouldn't feel like there was no way for you to comprehend what's going on. And speaking of comprehension, one of the challenges I had with this game was just the sheer amount of keywords and effects and abilities and things like this, right? That were on cards that were not explained, right? Some things I kind of knew because again, I'm a Magic player, so things like Death Right or airborne, which equals flying, or submerge, whatever, waterbound. These kind of made sense to me, but a lot of them we had to go look up, and even the combat rules, how combat works, how things are added, how defense are added. That was a lot trickier than I think at first glance. So my general feeling about sorcery is like this. I think sorcery would be a great board game where you have consistent cards, consistent maps, right? And the elements really do play well. But unfortunately, as a trading card game where you're building a deck, I just feel like right now in the current state, the game is both complicated and simple at the same time. And it's simple in ways that I don't find interesting, and it's complicated in ways I find unnecessary. And so my general feeling on Sorcery is like this. I think the card and the artwork's really good. I think the gameplay could be improved a lot. And that's basically why I think Sorcery right now as a game is not going to be that successful. Now, I do want to spend the last couple minutes of this video talking about the collectability of Sorcery. I do think Sorcery overall, collectible wise, is pretty cool. I think the fact that the artwork's really unique and it's really like, again, rustic, that old artwork, it's nice. The foiling in this card game is really cool too, because on foil cards, the back of the card, the actual card back is the artwork of the foil. So it's not just a foil, but it actually has like a different card back as well. And in addition to this, the foils are rare. They're not going to be one in every pack. Also, the foils are really good. It's really well done. The cards don't bend. That artwork is edge to edge, so it's really just looks really nice on a card. That's pretty much what I'll say for now for Sorcery. My opinion going forward on this game is, I think, again, every single card game that wants to be a card game has to show people like why it's a good game, and that's really important. I think Sorcery does not hit the does not hit the mark for me with respect to being a good game. However, I think the collectability of this game is fine. But if I were to think about, just collecting, then there's really no allure of this game for me personally. I would rather it be a good game that can also be collected rather than just be collected because the game sucks. Anyways, that's my overall review for Sorcery. For now, I won't really be playing this game. I mean, I may play it as a board game with my friends with the starter decks. But otherwise, I think mostly I'm not going to put a lot of money into it or anything like that. I do, of course, have a beta box of Sorcery here that I will probably never open. I'll just leave it here. It's kind of cool, right? Kind of like a shelf decoration type of thing. But that's all I'm ever going to buy for Sorcery, I think, at least for now. Now, if the game drastically changes for the future, if things are different, I will definitely reconsider. But for now, I don't think the game has a lot of legs. I think there are way better card games out there that are a lot simpler in the necessary places and then complicated to make the game interaction much more interesting. So if you're out there looking for a new card game, my recommendation is Sorcery is probably not the right game for you. I would look elsewhere. There's a lot of other options. In fact, I've reviewed a couple of them on this channel, so go give them a look. All right, that's going to do for me for today. I'm Mark from Solar Games. It's December, so stay frosty.